Viewers, these are momentous times. India, of course, is one of those major democracies in the world where every word spoken is dissected simply because we believe in an open society. But viewers, every media company, every media concern needs to exercise extreme caution and responsibility when they provide a platform to views. The Indian media landscape is an interesting one because domestic media and other mainstream foreign television and print media enterprises are all subject to reportage conditioned upon the laws of the land. Unfortunately, one side of this entire media landscape has been unregulated for years altogether, and we are talking about big social media enterprises. The government has now sought to end this distinction and bring big social media firms under regulation. And in the context of that, certain new IT rules have been framed, and they are obviously sparking a debate. And who better than Minister at the Union, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, as the nodal minister really for this exercise, to speak to us a little bit about the scope, number one, of the new IT rules and the practicalities. So thank you very much for speaking to Times Now, Mr. Chandrasekhar. Let me first ask you, great to have you. The amendment to the IT rules are aimed at ensuring that these big tech firms follow Indian law. Now, initially, when the government had made its mind clear on this, there was some resistance, there was a lot of chatter, there was also, of course, the usual suspects who emerged to say that this was a ruthless attempt once again at trying to control the flow of information and tamp down on dissent. So first things first, how, number one, consensus-oriented has this move been, and are these big tech companies on board?
So Rahul, thank you for having this conversation and giving me an opportunity to explain what the government is doing and what the government intends to do going forward. Let me just start by giving you a slightly broad context or a backdrop to what our goals are as a government or what our duty is as a government. The Honorable Prime Minister has laid out a vision in front of the country of $1 trillion digital economy. He has referred to the next 10 years as India Decade. You and many others are visibly seeing the impact of the last few years of policy making on our innovation ecosystem. And the internet is central to what we see in terms of our progress in the coming years. And the boundary conditions, in a sense, or the principles around which all of our policy making, all of our rule making for the internet has been and is and will continue to be, is about essentially three boundary conditions. That the internet should always be open, which means no one entity, no state, no government, no big tech can dominate the internet and reduce the openness of the internet, if I can use that phrase. That the internet, given the fact that we are the largest connected nation in the world, largest connected democracy in the world, 80 crore Indians use the internet today, and 120 crore Indians use the internet for various reasons. That the internet should be a safe and trusted place for a child, a woman, an elderly person, or any other form of Indian citizen who uses the internet for his business, for his life, for interacting with the government, as the case may be. And the third is that the internet, the relationship between the internet consumer and the internet platform should have clear principles of accountability. That means the platform, big or small, Indian or foreign, must be accountable to the Indian citizen that the platform serves. So these are the three broad conditions. In May 2021, the Prime Minister and the government enacted a set of IT rules, under the IT Act. They are called the intermediary guidelines, for the technical phrase. And we learned considerably between May 2021 and currently November 2022 or October 2022, what the emerging challenges are, what the weaknesses in the rules were, what the lacuna were, and who was complying with what and who was not complying with it. And therefore, after a period of almost 4 months of extensive public consultation, Rahul, where the consultations were with consumers, with lawyers, were with technology companies, with intermediaries, big, small, foreign, Indian, we have notified the amended IT rules of October 2022. So that is the journey, that is the context in which these rules were formulated, and those were the goals, the openness, safety and trust and accountability requirements of our citizens is why we enacted these rules.
So other stakeholders who are going to be affected, are they on board? That's the fundamental question.
The day after we enacted these rules and notified the rules, I had an extensively long engagement with the intermediaries, the big intermediaries and small intermediaries, Indian and foreign intermediaries. And I said, look, this is not to be seen as, our relationship should not be seen as, nor should the rules be seen as adversarial. This is really a partnership between government and the intermediaries with a common objective of creating a safe and trusted internet, of creating an accountability matrix, so that at the end of the day, there are satisfied consumers, there are consumers and citizens who feel safe using the internet for various applications. And frankly, that is win-win. It is win for the intermediaries and platforms that want to do business, conduct business online, and it is win for the government if we can make sure that more and more citizens, digital Nagriks, use the internet to connect with the government and to avail of public services and public goods as the internet grows and reaches the 120th citizen of India. So I took some effort in explaining this is a partnership. This should be seen as a partnership. It should evolve as a partnership with the common objective of a safe, trusted and accountable internet.
Well, the amended rules also stipulate the constitution of an entity which is been deemed to be a grievance appellate authority. Now, what does this mean exactly? What is its principal function?
So one of the things, Rahul, in the May 2021 rules was that the government tried to bring in the concept of accountability between the citizen who uses a platform and the platform. And we had stipulated at that time that all platforms are mandatorily required to appoint a grievance officer, and it was assumed that the grievance officer therefore would deal with all the grievances of the hundreds of millions of digital Nagriks that use the various platforms. However, the results have been a bit of a mixed bag. Many platforms have appointed grievance officers who were just naam ke vaste, sort of, optical illusions of a grievance officer. Many platforms have appointed grievance officers that were less than empowered to solve the grievance, and many of them and some of them did appoint grievance officers that made a fair attempt to address the grievances. But we want this to be a consistent model. This has to be a consistent level of quality, a consistent level of expectation from the digital Nagriks, who are the principal stakeholders of the Indian internet, that when they have a grievance, the platforms must respond. So the Grievance Appellate Committee is an appellate body. That is, if you as a digital Nagrik are dissatisfied with the grievance process being run by a particular platform, you today don't sit there and get frustrated, but you have an opportunity to appeal to this GAC, which will be a very digitally empowered, very, very different looking institution, which will allow a consumer to escalate his or her appeal in the event that the grievance process run by the platforms are not satisfactory.
Okay, but this particular committee will also have a central government employee, or rather appointees to it.
Absolutely.
Now, supposing, and let's just speak in hypotheticals, supposing someone has a problem with a post that is hypercritical of the government and its functioning, and it expects that post to be taken down by the host platform, and it doesn't happen and they move your committee, can we expect fairness? Because wouldn't there be a conflict of interest?
So this is exactly the point I'm coming down to, which is to say that these rules are for the first time talk about in some detail the only types of content that the platforms are obliged to take down. They are under Rule 31B. There is a 1 to 9 that lays out the content that we believe should not find place on the platform. There is nothing there that says you should not criticize the government or you should not criticize A or criticize B. This category of content that we say that the platforms are now responsible for or obliged to ensure that their platforms don't carry are range from content that belongs to another person. It talks about obscenity, content that promotes enmity between different groups on the grounds of religion, is harmful to children, infringes patents, is misinformation, impersonates other persons, national security, contains a computer virus. It's very limited to a category that represents user harm. And therefore, criticism, debate, discourse, all of these legitimate issues that are within the purview of the right to free speech are not areas that either the GSC or indeed the rules cover.
You know, I need to come in here because terms like misinformation or national security can be broadly interpreted by complainants also. So, you know, misinformation, now I'm probably come to a couple of examples of misinformation which obviously fall foul of the law overtly, but I'm talking about others who are perhaps putting out information which could be detrimental to the government's own view of itself, but might be very accurate. But someone who is familiar with government or a proxy or a friend of the government might challenge and call this misinformation, and then you have a process kicking in which could lead to that post being deleted. So I'm only asking you in the context of these broadly defined terms, will this not lead to a sort of censorship?
So this question has been asked, Rahul, whether the GSE, the Grievance Appellate Committee, is in some sense an ombudsman of content online, and it is not. Like I said, it is, and I said this during consultation as well, and I have said this publicly, that when the industry offered a self-regulatory organization to address the appellate process, the government confirmed that we are absolutely okay with that. And we waited 3 months for the industry to come back with a self-regulatory organization, an SRO. And it is only because the industry could not come to a consensus about a viable SRO that we have brought in the GSE. Please understand, the government is not interested in today spending a huge amount of energy and effort and time in addressing appeals of grievances. This problem is occurred because the current grievance redressal mechanism is operating in a very unsatisfactory, very, let's say, undesirably low quality manner as created by the platforms themselves. And by the way, we have enough empirical evidence and plenty of evidence that show that a lot of platforms have really not paid serious attention to their obligation to deal with this grievance addressal mechanism in a responsible manner. So this Grievance Appellate Committee is a disincentive for companies to not run a patchy, inconsistent grievance addressal mechanism. If they address the grievances at their level, there is no room for an appeal. And by the way, a Grievance Appellate Committee, Rahul, does not prevent the platform from approaching the courts tomorrow if they believe that the Grievance Appellate Committee is wrong.
Okay.
The process of natural justice that we believe applies to the platforms, we believe must also apply to the digital Nagrik. This is really just a balancing of the requirement of natural justice and grievance addressal for the Nagriks as well as the platform.
Let's open this conversation a little more out to some developments that have taken place. Twitter, big tech, of course, you're seeing a takeover or what is now, of course, a finalized takeover of Twitter by Elon Musk, who has in the past shared his apprehension about India's bureaucracy and has had, sometimes things not very pleasant to say about the manner in which business is done here. Do you see Twitter under him abiding with Indian laws, or do you think that there's going to be friction?
No, so Rahul, again, let me say this very clearly. I mean, I don't know if Elon Musk watches your channel, but to him or anybody else who's the owner or investor of an intermediary, our position on this as Government of India has been very clear, is clear, and will remain very, very clear and consistent. That the laws and the rules, our expectation is that all intermediaries, big or small, Indian or foreign, must follow them if they are to be treated as intermediaries. Now, it is quite clear from the rules, and Rule 7 says you can always choose not to be an intermediary and not comply with the rules. Okay. If you don't comply with the rules, then the safe harbor under Section 79 of the IT Act, which prevents platforms from being prosecuted or being subject to the laws of the land for content or illegalities on their platform, that safe harbor vanishes. And therefore, then you will have to deal with the laws, whether there is breach of trust or defamation or all of the other laws in our justice system that are laws that empower citizens. You'll have to deal with that.
Okay.
Because Section 79, as Section 230 in the US, essentially prescribes a safe harbor for all internet platforms that are intermediaries. And our matrix here, or our proposition here, is that status of the intermediary has to be an earned one, and it is not automatic. And
okay.
the way you
so there are no exceptions. No one's above the laws.
Platform is
everyone, if they want to do business,
and is an accountability,
has to basically be subject to Indian laws. Okay, that's pretty categorical.
Absolutely right.
Now, I just want to very quickly ask you.
Correct.
The applicability of these IT rules, these amended IT rules now to digital portals. What kind of supervision are they subjected to? There are so many digital portals. Many of these digital portals run here in this country, putting out news and other information. What about them?
So I want to make sure that we understand that the amendments deal with intermediaries, and intermediaries have wittingly or unwittingly, the intermediaries that are social media, for example, played a role in increasing the velocity of digital media platforms that are not necessarily very ethical, or indeed state actors hiding behind digital media or vested interests hiding behind digital media. So we have addressed the issue of the intermediaries being witting or unwitting partners to this type of, let us say, misinformation or insightful content. The regulation of digital media, which is done by the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, is unchanged and is what is called Part 3 of these rules. They were enacted and notified in May of 2021. They remain intact, and it is the Ministry of INB that regulates them. There is a two-part grievance redressal mechanism there, and so that remains intact. That is, as you know, has been subjected to some challenges in courts and is being adjudicated in some courts as we speak.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the developments here in our country. The Wire Meta controversy, steering you a little away into the realm now of what has been a controversy that has raged, and your own colleague in the Bharatiya Janata Party, Amit Malviya, has filed a police complaint and leveled allegations of criminal conspiracy and forgery to some news reports that The Wire has put out. The Wire has admitted it received fraudulent information. Do you believe they had malified intent?
Look, I don't want to comment on whether they had malified intent, but I think the consequences of that report have been fairly consistent with what they have done in the past, and I suspect is very core to their strategy, which is they shoot first, and there is an underlying sense that their objective is more of a pre-invested narrative of slandering people. And I think that is why Amit Malviya has approached the courts. So let that process play out. I think it is absolutely unfortunate that there are platforms like this that are going around peddling stories that are, at the best they are wrong, and at the worst they are manufactured with malintent. So it's not healthy for a country of ours, which is 80 crore Indians online and 120 crore Indians coming online, because this creates, and we have done studies in the ministry that misinformation travels faster than and wider and creates a wider audience than the correct information by almost a factor of 8 to 10 times the speed, and significantly higher numbers of audience that it reaches. That is the very nature of intermediaries and social media platforms today.
So you're not ruling out. You're not ruling out a certain degree of malafide intent. Okay, but let me just ask you, because The Wire has now filed a complaint as per reports against one of its own tech advisors or experts, who was the author of some of these articles that Mr. Malviya has found fault with. His name is Devesh Kumar. Do you believe they can distance themselves? Do you think The Wire can pin this on Devesh Kumar and walk away?
So Rahul, I'm quite uncomfortable getting drawn into a conversation of what the process of adjudication that Amit Malviya has launched, which is a legitimate desire for justice on his part. I don't want to shortcut that or predict how that will play out. I think he has a legitimate reason to feel very aggrieved. He has a legitimate reason to feel that this was something very deliberate, because it is so patently false.
Yeah, but The Wire is saying that they are not to blame. They were misled by this particular expert. The Wire says it was misled. Well, there's an expert who came on board and he wrote these articles and he sold us basically a lemon. That's really what it's coming down to. Do you believe it?
No, I mean, look, I don't believe it, but that's for the courts to believe or disbelieve. My views on this matter very little. I think I don't think very many people will believe that argument, and I think it's let's wait for the courts to go through and decide who was right and wrong in this, because
one of the consequences, fair enough, I completely agree with you.
Anybody's argument
the matter now
that was journalism.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yes.
The matter now, of course, is in the domain of the court, but there have been consequences, and damaging ones, for India. Tech fog, for example, this sort of superhuman app that The Wire said that the BJP is employing was sort of picked up upon by watchdogs, watchguards, or call them what you want to, a freedom, like Freedom House and other, rating indexes, to downgrade India's rating and suggest that democracy was backsliding here. Will the Indian government take this up aggressively with Freedom House and other agencies?
I can't speak to that, Rahul. It's something that I think other people in the government, including the INB minister, will have to take a view. But I think on the limited point that I am empowered to talk about, I think the internet must not be a place where misinformation is the content that travels fastest and widest.
Okay.
That just is a recipe for chaos. It is a recipe to undermine the very DNA of what the internet is supposed to be, which is to create good. And I think there's really a real heavy lifting effort required to rid the internet from this, or minimize the internet in this type of malintent, malified, deliberately.
So let me. I appreciate that
is being created with an intent to deliberately create. Yeah,
I appreciate
that.
So
I will not speak to the larger consequences of this, Rahul, and I do not want to speak on the.
My last and final question. Final question to you. There are people who claim that the BJP exercises. I mean, I'm not talking about the Wire magazine and the reports that we've seen which have been retracted. I'm talking about others who come forth and said that the BJP manages to exercise disproportionate influence on social media companies, and you go back to Facebook, etc. There was a protracted sort of insinuation on the back of a protracted sort of what should one call it, confrontation between the government and Facebook, that the BJP has been able to muzzle dissent against it by forcing or arm twisting these big tech giants to remove stories. It is reported around 3,600 posts were asked to be taken down by the government in 2019, and that number went up to about 9,800 in 2020. What's your reaction to this?
No, look, this is certainly something that I want to talk about, which is this narrative that has been deliberately sought to be created, that in some sense our government, or indeed India in general, is a country where there is some restrictions on free speech, or indeed there is some effort on our part, tech fog, or any other imaginary effort to sort of reduce critical commentary. And it is anything but that. If you look at, and the irony of this is, Rahul, yesterday of all people, Kapil Sibal was trying to take pot shots at this amended IT rules as the man who presided over Section 66A and imprisoned scores of young people all around the country. So, look, I think people tend to forget that, or want us to forget, that it is Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji who said that the internet will always be open. The Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji who said net neutrality, despite the US not doing net neutrality, we will have a net neutral internet. It is Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji's government that saw privacy becoming a fundamental right. So we have done everything to keep the internet open, and it is a policy objective. It is a stated policy objective that the internet should always be open. The internet should always
judge us
be safe
by our
and
actions,
and accountable.
says Rajiv Chandrasekhar in
the
short.
Highest of irony.
Yeah.
Rahul.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry?
Yes, you're saying judge us. You're saying
that, Rahul.
you're just saying judge us by our actions. Really, that's what it boils down to.
Judges by our action, and not this rhetoric and this make-believe, over-invested narrative that people want to paint.
Right.
It is, at the best, to use a very rude word, it's absolute nonsense.
Well, I leave it at that, viewers. It's been an interesting conversation with Mr. Chandrasekhar as always. Thank you very much for speaking to us. Hope to see you shortly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.